Thank you for coming. I'd just firstly like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and those we've yet to meet. So thank you for coming along. Today we're here to have a look at the topic of why is Australian art so cheap? Now, I don't really know what all these people are doing on stage because I could talk about that for hours on my own. But what they've done is shoved me in the moderator's chair, so I'm not allowed to. But that's okay. I'll throw my tuppence worth in occasionally. We've only got one image for you, which I think is an illustration of maybe part of the problem. And internationally, you know, our government pretty much advertises us as furry animals and beaches, and occasionally furry animals on beaches. And I think part of the problem, you know, of course, people overseas then think that that's all we are, and we don't even have a culture, let alone the oldest continuous culture on Earth, or a number of very old continuous cultures, and a very healthy and vibrant contemporary culture. And I think sometimes we think of ourselves that way, you know, the wider general population as well thinks of us as a wonderful holiday destination rather than a cultural one, and yet they're living amongst it. But to talk about it all and get some various different perspectives, we have a wonderful panel here today with, I'll go from left to right rather than alphabetically, Mark Hughes, who has worked in the commercial gallery sector both here and then in New York, and continues to operate as one of the leading international consultants, Sydney-based. We have Dr. Dick Quan, who is a collector, and he's a collector not only of Australian art, but art by international artists. Cressida Campbell, and Cressida is an artist who shows internationally as well as here domestically. I think with Simon Lee, was it, in London, and has shown in Berlin and stuff as well, and is participating these days in some of the international fairs. And Drew, who's a very young artist, still at National Art School, whose work you can see in the National Art School booth here in Bay 25, and whose work I think is selling like hotcakes. Probably because it's so cheap.
Affordable, let's say.
Affordable is the word.
For anybody in the audience to pay my bills.
And I had a chat to Drew yesterday, and he's got some very strong ideas about why Australian art is so cheap. Do you want to tell us a bit, Drew? We'll start with you. Youth before beauty, they say, is it? Or something
well, if you
like
insist, excuse-moi. We was raised quite briefly, I think, as we were having a quick chat in the VIP lounge, which was very fancy. And one of the big things that you raised, I think, Dick, was emerging artists and junior artists, as you put it, aren't really pricing their work very much at all. I was like, when I was first starting to show work a couple of years ago, just in Ari's, I was pricing my work at $310, and my parents said no one's gonna buy it for that. That's too much, and that's like $50 more than a pair of jeans. You know, I think there's definitely a broader cultural issue and a broader cultural understanding that art isn't really worth too much. You know, when someone's starting to show work in New York and someone's showing work as an emerging artist in China as well, there's much more of a drive to have a sales price. And I think more here, it's about exhibiting before reaching a sales price as well. So I think even from a grassroots perspective, there's a big issue with how much we do value art, not just like culturally, but as a commodity as well.
Yeah, well, I would agree. I think that's pretty much what I was saying. And also, I actually don't think it's a bad idea for a young artist to underprice their work, because it's important to get the work out there and to get it seen, to build your reputation, because in the end, you know, these works that may cost hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, the materials are the same, cost the same as when that artist was selling them for a few $1,000s. So it's not. It's an interesting thing, the pricing of art, and there's so many different factors. But on that emerging artist note, I remember actually going, when I first opened my gallery, which showed a lot of emerging artists, over to New Zealand, and was quite struck by how much more they paid for the work of young artists. And I was talking to somebody about that. My artist's work was at that stage, really from the low, a couple of $1,000s up to, 5, maybe 10. And young New Zealand artists were around 10 and above. And they said, I think New Zealand has a stronger embrace of its culture and its contemporary art. And they pointed out that there was a much lower ceiling. So they said that New Zealanders wanted to support their artists, but even those young artists, as they matured, their work wouldn't often go very much above 20 or 30,000. Whereas here, if an artist becomes successful, it opens up to being in the, up toward 100,000 or whatever for a successful artist. And I think that was largely perhaps economies of scale and the cultural issue. But what have you found in terms of pricing of your work, Cressida, here and internationally?
Well, I started exhibiting quite very young. I was only about 19. Well, it was reasonably young. And I started in the beginning very, very affordable. And I mean, that was fine, because I look at some of it and I wish I hadn't exhibited it at all. But I also think, I was very much evolving, even though I'd always loved painting and drawing since I was about 6. It was still, I was still trying to work out what I was doing and stuff. But, and I spent 7 years on the dole, and lived I was living in Palm Beach, which you might find amusing on the dole, that 3 of us who were painting, renting a house, subletting a house, and I remember it took 7 years for me, from having about 3 exhibitions, to actually be able to just start supporting myself. Mm-hmm. And it's really just been an incredibly gradual thing of prices going gradually up. In those days, I'm talking about the 80s. I remember there was an art fair when I was exhibiting with Rexo, and I think it was in the early 90s in Hong Kong, but it wasn't an Art Basel. It wasn't that. It was a proper fair, but it wasn't as glitzy And I had a picture that sold to, I think it sold to an expat Australian. And that was thrilling to sell to someone over there. But then it took a long time for me to start. I exhibited in London with Angela Neville about 3 or 4 times in the early 2000s.
Was there pressure from the London gallery to increase your prices?
No. You see, that was also in conjunction with Philip Bacon. Mm-hmm. And I know that when Rex Irwin used to bring Lucian Freud's and various English artists' work, Kossoff, and the odd exhibition to Sydney, it was always, you can't sort of, if the pound was stronger than the dollar, I'm hopeless with all of that sort of thing, but you couldn't say if it was £10,000 that it was going to be $30,000. Do you know what I mean? Actually, wait a minute, sorry, it did work like that.
So it had to be parity.
Had to be the equal.
Yeah.
And that was the same as in London.
Because I found when some of my artists started to show internationally, there was pressure, particularly in America, where I think they equate quality to dollar value.
Right.
That their prices were too low, so there was this pressure from the American galleries to put the young artist prices up. And
Yeah.
that's sort of a double-edged sword, because there's an element to our culture here where we celebrate international success, but there's the tall poppy syndrome as well.
Well, also, I remember talking to Lynn Williams, the wife or widow of Fred Williams, and she was convinced to show Fred Williams's work in a very good gallery in LA. And he put the prices up, and Fred Williams had been long dead, but they didn't sell. You know, it was just...
Maybe didn't put them up enough.
I don't think so. I think it was more that already they were quite a lot here, and to suddenly take someone's work when no one has a clue who they are, and you're charging sort of 500,000 or something.
And I think you might have hit on something there as well. It's okay to put prices up, but it's death to bring them down. So I think people here are very, well, gallerists here, and perhaps artists sensibly too, are hesitant to push their prices too quickly or rapidly.
Exactly.
Because bringing them down is
Yeah.
not a good look.
No.
Yeah. What do you think, Dick?
Look, you know, I'm very opinionated as always, but you know, I think art is now commoditized. It's a global commodity. It's a global wealth commodity, as well as a visual, and as there are many aspects of art. And with the pricing issue is that I do believe you're right. People don't value art in Australia, and I see exactly your point about it not being expensive enough. As you know, I collect lots of international arts, and as Mark knows, there's not many artists that can be taken seriously overseas because we're not expensive enough.
Yep.
And by the same token, within Australia, everyone thinks they're so bloody expensive, I can't afford it. But in reality, in the global parity pricing, is that everyone now sees a globalized world. And if you buy a pair of sneakers that are worth less than $1,000, they're not a good pair of sneakers. And so Australia's suffering from that. And so these days, I think for our Australian art to become the global commodity, it has to have a demand. And if you don't have demand, then you can't command the prices. So how do we create demand for Australian art? And so I think the global art fairs, and I can see international galleries here filming this at the moment, and I can see, you know, the art fairs, the biennales and the curates is the Australian artist's key to create that. And yes, I absolutely agree with you. Most people are good at putting their prices up, but when they suffer the slump, and a lot of artists do suffer the slump when they turn it into industrial production and they're not moving further, you can't get those prices. And then the artist then won't sell any work in Australia. So I always think the artists that can grow their work overseas to as many collectors as possible, to as many galleries as possible, are the ones who succeed. And of course, there are different markets. There are the museum market, the biennale market, the private collector market, the decorator market. But I guess the more spots you hit, the more you'll have the ability to sell it at the price you want to sell it at. But I do think Australian art is in a real bad funk, as you said at the very beginning. Our government has been terrible, absolutely shocking at promoting Australia as a cultural destination. To them, culture begins with a K, and it's all about sport. We're not.
And to what extent do you think it's because you talk about demand, an economies of scale thing, us being quite a small nation in terms of population?
Oh yeah, I think it's a bad problem, because I think, you know, serious artists often produce a lot of work, and even though they produce a lot of work, they're often of very high quality, and that here we don't have to scale to absorb that work, and not many artists in Australia will have 5 galleries or with workshops, you know, in China, except the ones who are associated with UAP, who can turn to produce the stock that the international galleries require, because you have to have a certain exposure level for an artist to keep the work up at a, you know, to be people to buy it. You can't have just one gallery showing every 3 years for your works to be noticed. You have to be an artist who has many galleries showing it at many biennales, as many art fairs.
And Mark, you've worked, of course, in galleries internationally. I imagine, running a gallery here is expensive enough, but running one in New York or one of the other sort of expensive cities around the world, it would be very hard for a gallery to think about taking on an Australian artist when their price point is so low.
Well, it depends on the artist, and it depends on how localized that artist has their market is. It is a complex issue, the issue of pricing and value, because, as Cressida said, if you have an artist who is sells well in their own country, therefore they're at the right price. They're selling their work maybe for $70,000, $100,000 or more, but you cannot just drop that artist into a gallery elsewhere in the world and expect that people will pay whatever for something that they don't know. That's the thing is that the management of the artist and the journey of the relationship, the gallery-artist relationship is very sensitive and very important from the gallery's perspectives, the strategy, how they manage the artists, all those sort of complex things that go into that relationship, and then the journey that the gallery and the artists go on together, hopefully over a longer period of time. That is, in a sense, the sort of ground zero of this conversation, because that gallery then, they're going to meet the artist hopefully at the younger, earlier stage of their career. They set the prices, they're strategic, they manage them carefully, but then the role of the gallery is to take that work out into the world. I agree, we need people to come here and to know about the galleries and to come to the fairs and so on, but the important thing is for those artists to be seen elsewhere. We're talking about price, and price, the market is the gallery, biennales and so on. There are different kinds of markets, as Dick said. So it's a complex thing. When I was working at Gallery Lalong and we showed Rosemary Lang, Rosemary had already, thanks to the work of Gita Weiss, at bringing her work to the Armory show years before, had already sort of established a presence for Rosemary in America. We were able to build on that. And she has a gallery in Germany, and obviously she shows with Tolano in Melbourne, and we all sort of worked as to try to find that balance between the right price. The works are limited editions and so on. It was quite, but it's a complex thing of trying to work out where does it begin. I had this thought that for the last hour of the fair, all the Australian galleries, instead of discounting the work, should put it up 10% and then start a new benchmark.
And it becomes complicated too, because there's different attitudes in different parts of the world as well to things like discounting. So when I would do Hong Kong Fair, so my policy was generally to increase prices about 10% a year and avoid price pushing, even if an artist was being very successful. And so I would do that before the Hong Kong Fair, because we had a buffer of 10% to discount if somebody bought two or something like that. But that gave us a 20% buffer, because as some of the Chinese galleries had said to me, collectors in China won't come into the gallery and point at a painting and say, how much is that work? They'll say, what's the discount on that? But it is also, it's also very much a cultural thing. So, in Germany, I don't think that they even ask for a discount. And a lot of the Australian collectors here would never think to ask for a discount because it's crass or whatever, whereas it's part of the culture in other countries. With Rosemary, of course, is an interesting example, because she was achieving very good prices for photographic work, which at the time, that she was starting and exhibiting, photography was a difficult medium in Australia to get decent prices for, because people were still asking, is this art, But of course, internationally, it was a medium that was much more
Well,
accepted.
regardless of whatever the medium was, she's a great artist and
Yeah.
was making fantastic work
Yeah.
then. So really,
And were her
it's-
prices here at a level internationally that was kind of sat well, or were people still interested
yes,
in those ones?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it really is an important thing to understand the role of the gallery in this conversation. I mean, in America, those of you who go to galleries in New York, you will not see even though it's the law to actually have the price list available for people. Most commercial galleries don't show prices at all in galleries. You have no idea when you walk into a New York gallery what the price is. And even if you ask what the price is, it's quite difficult to get the answer. So in a sense, the idea of discounting isn't really a point, because it's what is the published price. What someone pays for it can be 10% less, 15% less, 20% less, but the price sort of stays that way. So even in a downturn, the price doesn't obviously go down. I'm talking about primary market, obviously, not in the auction world.
Yeah.
So I think that I'm not suggesting that galleries should then hide all their prices.
No,
But it's about careful management. And I think the important thing is to start at the right level.
Yeah.
So for younger artists, for galleries to really, when an artist joins a gallery, that is in a sense the beginning of this market I feel we're talking about. And that moment is the decisions on the pricing at that time lays the groundwork for what follows.
And Dick, have you ever gone into a gallery and the prices aren't there and you've had to negotiate wondering how much it is, or you had an idea beforehand, the sort of ballpark you're playing in?
Well, the wonders of the internet means that there are no secrets. And so often, if the New York gallery, which I absolutely agree with you, Mark, it's like a secret coven. When thank you so much for being my gallerist in New York when you were there. But, it's like a secret coven. They don't say anything. It's very discreet. It's all, like they want to judge how much you really wanted, and they won't even show you the good work unless they think you're somebody. And whereas I see in Asia, as you said, there are cultural differences across many. We're all seasoned art fair attenders, and we know that at different art fairs there's a different culture. And so I think you're right. In Asia, the collectors are fast. There's no slow burn. Whereas in Europe, I find they're so slow getting work out of them and getting that relationship. They think that, they should know you for 3 years before they sell your work. Whereas in Asia, everyone makes up their mind in half an hour, if not 10 minutes. And if you don't want it, there'll be someone else who want it. And I was told currently it's 300,000 renminbi, or they don't think your work's serious.
What's
And
that
so
in Aussie dollars these days?
It's about 60,000 Australian dollars. It was just about 50,000 US dollars is, or the work's not serious, and so they just think, I don't want it. And so I think we're suffering from I don't think there are many Australian artists who can command 50,000 Australian dollars, and that is seen as, this is a emerging artist, whereas...
I remember some Chinese artists that were still at art school getting $50,000 a canvas. What would you do with $50,000?
What would I
If
do
you
with
got it,
$50,000? Do my best to invest it wisely in this climate. Go to an accountant and pray for my future. I mean, I have a friend who thinks the world is going to end and I should just spend it on some nice Gosha Rybachinski like we have over here. And I probably would do a little bit, but it's how we go. But I actually asked a whole bunch of my friends on Instagram as well for their opinion on this. And they brought up a similar point, is that it's quite disheartening for them to go overseas and for them to see art school students fetching these, to us, quite grandiose price points. And, knowing friends, having, I'm just about to finish my postgrad now and it's almost our grad show time, and talking to undergrad and postgrad students who still don't know how to price their work and are still very self-conscious selling their work for under $1,000. It's really indicative of a really sad sentiment that a lot of young Australian artists don't see their worth and don't see what they do as worthwhile. And that's something that does go from beginning to end. It's like the way that, that a lot of things function. When you finish art school, you usually get invited to be in a whole bunch of group shows, and usually you have to pay for them as well. So someone will say like, hi, cool, we'll show your work, give us $200, and you should be really thankful for letting us give you this opportunity. You don't feel like you're worth anything when you start off as an artist, unless you're really lucky. Usually you feel like you have to work for your opportunities. Even when they're given to you on a silver platter, you have to pay for the silver to be put on the nickel underneath it. It's really disheartening, and it would be amazing if you know, a lot of young artists did have the confidence to start a price point, because it is starting a price point. You know, the role of a collector is to buy.
And I think that's another cultural issue that
Yeah.
you've hit upon there, where artists are expected to be grateful here, as opposed to being fully appreciated for their work. Cressida, have you always felt fully appreciated as an artist?
Well, I've always been lucky in that people have wanted to buy my work. Having said that, I work really hard, and in the beginning they weren't very expensive. So it's been a long progression. But I had a strange experience recently where the Tweed Regional Gallery had a 30th anniversary of their gallery, and I don't know if anyone's been there, it's where Margaret Olley's studio is, and it was my first time there, and it's a really nice modern building and has a fabulous view of the landscape from it, and the Margaret Olley's studio space is fantastically done. Anyway, they wanted to buy a picture of mine, raise money for to buy a picture to celebrate the 30th anniversary. And when I was asked about it, I was doing a wood block, and I just make a one print off each wood block, and I was in a hurry to get the picture finished for Philip's show in Sydney, and I didn't have time to put enough paint on it to get a print, and he said, are you doing a print? In the end, I didn't finish it for the show, so in the end, he said, if you do a print of it, I'll sell it, that they can raise the money to buy it. And I said, are you sure they have the money, you know, because I didn't want them to feel they were forced into it. And he said, yeah, God, yeah, they're thrilled, etc. So then I gave it to them, and then I had to go up for this dinner a couple of weeks ago, and it was the people were terribly nice, and everyone was thrilled, but they kept on saying to me, because I had to speak for a minute at this dinner, and I was told about 3 times that I had to say, thank you so much for, you know, raising the money to buy this work, etc. But then they said that they're actually still raising the money. And
how much are we talking, if you don't mind me asking?
110,000.
Yeah.
So it was a substantial amount of money.
Yeah.
But I felt incredibly embarrassed. In my speech, I said I feel like I should have a sandwich board,
Yeah.
you know, with $110,000 on my chest.
Yes, you have to sing for your dinner.
I mean, it was, in actual fact, they'd already raised the money, but they just wanted to raise more for the foundation. But it was a strange situation, and I was really grateful they bought. I'm not saying grateful, but it was fabulous. They wanted it, and I was thrilled. But it's weird with art. There isn't it's you don't go up to a doctor or a lawyer and say, you know, how much did you earn this year? Or it's like it's almost like everyone thinks that an artist should be grateful just
should
because.
Be starving.
Well,
God, that narrative of the struggling artist. I mean, like,
I don't
Jesus
think
Christ.
I think people are in fact, I think they're harder on dealers than the artists, because they don't understand why the dealer has to get 40% or 50%, which is stupid, because I mean, I really value dealers, and like I often get on very well with them, but the public though often have this sort of, they think of them as real estate agents or sharks or something, whereas they don't realise you, unless
It's a
you're
lot of hard
brilliant
work.
at selling your work, you really do need them.
Yeah.
I think it is just like real estate agents, I guess. You just got to hope you get a good one. You know, it is very difficult, especially, and God, like, I'm so happy, showing with Alaska Projects, for example, because it's the first time I've been with someone and I actually feel like, thank you, I'm happy to give you 40%. You know, being an emerging artist especially, and showing work and seeing your money kind of disappear in front of your very eyes when they do very little to support you, and they kind of see just their kind of little box as their philanthropy, and that's kind of done. You know, if you find someone who's willing to put the work in to get that 40%, that's the best feeling in the world.
Yeah,
But
and good, I mean, good dealers, the ones that I've had are good. They work really hard, but it's not in a way that's often obvious. I mean, it's basically incredible people skills.
Yeah, yeah. Mark, in your experience, are artists grateful enough?
I don't think this is why we're here. No, I think artist's job is to make the art.
Yeah.
That's it. It's not about going and giving speeches. It's not about, if an artist has a gallery, they are the managers of the artist and their career. If the artist is making excellent work and they know how to edit, or they're being managed to edit their work well, that their exhibitions are beautifully presented, that the work is represented to others appropriately, it's the artist's job to make the work. So if they're grateful or not, it doesn't really matter, you know.
I'll tell you one thing that I think is a real dilemma with the way the world's going with all the art fairs. And Dick was saying that's really important for an artist to get their work out and be seen. And you made the point that some of the incredible Chinese contemporary artists who have wonderful work, but they often get teams of other people to make the work. I'm not belittling that, but it means they are in a position where they can create more. Whereas you also said, with artists that work slowly, you just can't be everywhere. That's one problem. So it's quite difficult. I work quite slowly, and so if I wanted to have work in every art fair, it would be quite difficult.
Sure, and I think that's what I was making that distinction, that there are some artists now with that industrial production properties, and more recently I've seen, and I think, art's moving to different directions now, and it's broadening, and I think that I see a New York European viewpoint, that sort of Northern Atlantic, and now I'm seeing the Pacific viewpoint, and we were at Beijing Contemporary a week and a half ago, and we could see the vision of painting moving in this sort of, because people forget, in China the market is not like, the size is inconceivable to Australian.
Yeah.
So that, just in the Beijing area, there's 20 million, that's the population of Australia, just outside of a city. And so it's a really hard thing for Australian artists to cut through. Yeah. And so they need the industrial production. And not only do they, what I've noticed recently is that the artists who don't have those means are now selling all these sort of products like tea sets, T-shirts, it's because it gets the image out. Right. And it's sort of, they're using a different mechanism from the normal artists, and because it's so
really
competitive.
I mean, a T-shirt with your emblem on it.
Don't be too, if you sell 1 million T-shirts with your emblem on it, if you don't underestimate the power of the T-shirt.
Well, you might get your emblem out there, but it doesn't mean each T-shirt is worth a fortune.
If you turn into a limited edition by Gucci, it is And I've only known one Australian artist who's successfully done it, and that's Sally Smart last year when the entire collection of Marnie was done by, like she was seen by more people in one season globally than almost any other Australian artist I know.
But is that what you call success with the art object? Is it?
Well, I know what your art's like, but I can tell you that ever since Lindy Lee got her work selfied by a Chinese movie star at the Shanghai Art Fair, she has sold like nothing on this earth.
Even like looking at how
and I don't want you to underestimate it. And I think Australia is a little bit behind at the moment.
No, I'm
with
not
everyone
saying...
thinking, no, just let me finish. Just let me finish. Like in Australia, they need to get a grip. The tick list for an artwork to be good has just got longer. And the pricing of artworks in Australia is very low. It's very low because no one knows what it is. You ask anybody, can you tell me one Canadian artist you think is of global quality? Can you tell me one Lithuanian artist? And I think Australia suffers from that because our government can't put that forward.
But are you saying a Lithuanian artist would know a well-known Australian artist?
I don't think they would.
No, I think what you're saying is that and we're talking about price, so the price point determines on the level of notoriety of the artist or the level of recognizability of the artist.
Right.
Branding.
I think like
branding.
you could, I mean, like even, this isn't like, I feel like it's quite easy to brand fashion as a millennial issue or something, but even looking how like Bauhaus design and how like that really, really beautiful iconic Mondrian mod dress affected a cultural recognition and acknowledgement of a genre and of an epoch and of a period of time, that's something that is really important. It is a cultural issue. I think it was really great to see Romance Was Born start to put Australian artwork. There was an Australian artist whose name I can't remember, but they're going out with Nixie Killick, who's an amazing designer, Australian designer, who had their work in a Moschino's collection. And that's a really beautiful thing to see, is see like New York Fashion Week have an Australian artist in there on their runway, and seeing different ways that Australian artists can be acknowledged is one way that I think is really important to introduce Australian artists to the market. I don't think that's a bad thing at all. It's just marketing.
And to me it's the price point, right? So if you were associated, like Sally Smart, with a brand that the dress costs $1,000, the artwork can be $25,000, $30,000.
Yeah. Right. I wasn't saying it was a bad thing. I was just...
I
thought you were saying...
at one point.
And it's not about the... I don't think Dick was saying
saying
it's about the quality of the art, but it's about the fact that the price is affected by this, global recognition factor.
Yeah.
And you have to be globally acknowledged as an artist. And so, unfortunately, there are many people who do many works. They don't know they're doing works that look like other people from other countries because they're in the bubble doing their own work. And the problem is that if someone did it in China, that work is immediately worth 300,000 renminbi. But no Australian artist can charge 50, 60,000 Australian dollars off the rack. But in China, you can. And in the US, I don't know what's the price, because I find in Australia, once they get to about 30,000, everybody goes, oh my God, it's too expensive. Whereas, as you know, at an art fair, like a global art fair, like 30,000 Australian dollars is, it's just, no one even blinks.
Yeah, the art fair thing, I mean, the question, why is Australian art so cheap? I mean, the question really is compared to what? And I think what we're probably looking at is compared to the global art market. And what is the global art market? It is the market that I feel it's a networked group, quite large networked group of galleries that participate at all the Basels, for example, Miami, Basel, Switzerland, and Hong Kong. And you find that the artists who are part of that the network of galleries, they also have galleries in Rio and Tokyo and New York and Paris and London. And so the artist's work is being shown somewhere, quite often. It's So for those of us who go to these fairs, you're being reminded in a sense of the same artists, and therefore that market is sort of held. So if there's a quiet moment in Latin America, you know, it doesn't affect the artist market in Berlin or in Europe, you know, so...
Yeah, and I think you're right, and I do remember doing Hong Kong, and on a Sunday afternoon like now, we sold about $30,000 worth of one artist's work, and Mary and I were thrilled. And Mary went off to the toilet and came back, and she had left the booth having just sold these paintings to a mainland Chinese person, smiling, and she came back down, down at mouth. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said she was walking past one of the galleries on the way back and overheard this woman say, "I'll put the 500,000 euro in today and the other 500,000 euro tomorrow." And of course, it just made, well, not exactly depressing, but it put it all in perspective, of course. And I think you're right. We're talking about why is it so cheap. Perhaps, you know, one part of it is compared to prices that artists get around the world. But also, why is it so cheap compared to our own standard of living? Because if you look at the statistics, artists are generally amongst the least well reimbursed for their efforts within our own society.
I think it's about, you know, understanding this idea of value, and I don't mean financial value, value of culture, the value of ideas. You know, an artist an artwork is only as good as the value of the ideas and what it conveys. You can make a lot of work, and it can be terrible work. You can make one thing a year, and it can be very special. Yeah. I mean, and I think it's the appreciation of those values that is the core of that. I think you know, Australians aren't stupid people. You know, if they recognise the value of something, like the contribution that this art offers community, city, country, themselves internally, emotionally, you know, that value, then, you know, there's a kind of price to that value, you know, and I think that I mean, things have definitely changed. Like when I moved back from New York, things have really radically changed here in terms of the market. We have an art fair here, you know, and but I do think that it's understanding. One of the things that I do in my work is really try to convey what makes the work special. And if people understand why the work is special, they also understand the value financial, and therefore they also understand when they're getting a good deal. Oh my God, I only paid $5,000 for it, and I look at it every day and I love it. I don't care what I paid for it. It's worth 20 now, I'd never sell it. There's that value. And then there is somebody who's, you know, you're looking at an artist who's $150,000 and they have, you know, represented their country at the Venice Biennale, for example, you know, and so it's all of our jobs to convey, I feel, that value, what is special in the work. Because there's a lot of work that isn't special, that is high priced, and there's a lot of amazing work that is lesser priced, that's cheap.
I think we've got our work cut out for us.
Yeah, and following on that point is actually it's Jean Sherman, who Mark originally worked for many, many years ago, who said to me, a work is and it always stuck with me, it's about the cultural resonance of that work. And I think work that can progress with its cultural resonance, like 100 years, whenever I look at work, I always ask a very simple question. What will we say about this work in 100 years' time and in 200 years' time? Well, 99% of it will be consigned to dustbins of time. And that's fine, because I think, you know, things that you enjoy and look at which are beautiful, that's fine. But the works that endure, they have, to me, the highest value. And I always say, I never buy a work. All I'm doing is I'm giving money to an artist to make a work that's better. And when they no longer can produce that, then I don't want to. And so it doesn't matter what price you start at, and you made a very good point about that. In fact, I think, you know, for many artists, more have sold out of my dining room than have the gallery, because we'll come in and, you know, most of my friends aren't art buffs, they don't like art, They just look at it and go, well, you know, this is something I've seen. Oh, well, I would like to have that too. And so, and to further Mark's point, it's the role of the gallery to make it sure that the right person has it sitting in the right place for people to see that work and to value it in their minds what its cultural resonance value is.
I think, I guess from an emerging perspective, there's a really big divide in Australia between cultural value and a cultural longevity. In Australia, it's quite funny how a public exposure to art is entirely reliant on a prize system, especially, and on a
Prize or price?
prize with a Z. So, like, for example, you know, the Archibald Prize is like the iconic way that Australians get in touch with art, and it's through portrait painting, and it's through a very specific kind of portrait painting, which is from at least one life sitting, and in specifically oils, watercolors, acrylics on canvas or paper. And that's, to me, I think, difficult, because it's hard for a contemporary work which would have a real cultural longevity to introduce itself into the public eye and to integrate itself into a public consciousness. And I think that it's really difficult being, my work, for example, I can't enter it into pretty much any prize. And an artist who's really, really gorgeous and contemporary, like, for example, Michael Staniak or Marion Tubbs, they don't do works that they can enter into it. They're more successful overseas than they are here, because their work isn't able to integrate itself into a current cultural consciousness so that it can have a cultural longevity. I think that's a really almost embarrassing issue for me, having to explain to people why I can't. Like, if I'm like saying like, oh, hi, I'm an artist, like, cool, enter the Archibald Prize, and I go, yeah, I can't. And it's even worse if you're a
Probably
sculptor.
don't want to even.
Yeah, I mean, like, no, I would love to. I would love to be able to show my work at the Archibald and say to mum and dad, like, hey, look, I did it. But I'm incapable of doing that. And so many artists are. They're not able to show their work at the most public levels. And they're just stuck like that. If you look at someone like John Bloomfield, for example, who was so on point when he entered the Archibald Prize and won it and was disqualified from it and got the prize money taken away from him. He was doing airbrush paintings in like the 70s and 80s, which ironically are now kind of taken over by Fiona Lowry, who won with an airbrush painting, which was equally gorgeous. I'm not saying she can't do that, but people who are cultural vanguards and innovators, they aren't able to do what they do best in this
Well, I
country.
guess there's some hope there that Fiona can win it with airbrush, which was disqualified before, that we are moving in the right direction. And I think, you know, we have a number of philanthropists. We have a dearth of philanthropy in this country compared to other places, and we have some very good mouthpieces for increasing philanthropy. But I think generally speaking, you know, in a lot of other countries, artwork and buying artwork is considered a method of stepping up the social ladder, whereas here it would tend to be buying another racehorse or boat. And that's a sort of cultural change that we probably need to initiate into the general appreciation of art and the effort and the work that goes into it by our artists and creative peoples. I think it's really almost time to open up to, if you're happy to open up to the audience for questions. This is usually the time when nothing happens, and then they all come running down at the end to ask you questions. But we have a question.
Well, actually, when I was making those points of the responsibility of the gallery, what I really was saying or wasn't saying was that I don't see that galleries are doing a lot of that careful strategy. I don't think galleries see themselves as businesses as much as they should. So I think that is definitely a moment for changing. I mean, the art world is changing. It's radically changing. The art world that I left New York 7 years ago, and it has changed a lot in that time. And I'm back, 3 or 4 times a year. I think that the way that artists are taught to be business people is also now part of the conversation. Am I right, Drew? Is there an element of being taught communication and promotion and that kind of thing?
At my school, at least, we have professional practice. So we have people from NAVA is a really great organisation as well, and they come in, they give us talks. We learn how to make a website, get a business card, get the ABN, and be able to properly market yourself as a product. Because that's definitely something that a lot of people have issues with in the arts, is that you really do have to, especially in Australia as well, because you don't get swept up immediately. You have to last 10 years before you get probably a major sellout, commercial show, and you have to be able to survive for that long. And it's a real struggle on the part of an emerging artist to keep their brand and to keep recognizable, to be able to write out grant applications, to be able to write project proposals, and to beg for money. You have to learn how to, beg and steal in the arts, to be a young artist in Australia. It's really something that we're learning early on, that we do have to engage in that process.
Well, that's great. So I would like to see galleries adapting as well. But the art fair thing, we are here as part of that. That is still, I would say, the largest, well, in fact, it's a growing marketplace for art. Less people are going to galleries to look at art. They come here for the sort of snap decision.
Well, I was just thinking more about the internet and these sort of aggregators that have popped up where they're representing artists on the internet and how they're working and how they're evolving.
Well, there's probably a market it's not the market that I know. What I tend to be are the eyes for my clients in a way. So if they're not able to travel, I can talk about the work in ways, hopefully, that I can sort of bring it to life for them. I can talk about my experience of understanding something. I don't participate in sort of internet buying art. So yes, I'm probably a bit old school in that respect. I do like, I appreciate and understand what the galleries do. But it is changing. I think artists definitely, galleries definitely, their biggest challenge is also to see themselves less as, sort of custodians for an artist and more as businesses, really,
I think that's possibly one of the reasons for the popularity of fairs is that, for me, certainly anyway, most good art still needs to be seen in the flesh to be fully appreciated. And whereas you can see, work from around the world with a click of a mouse, the fair offers the same opportunity, but to see the work actually in the flesh. Do we have any other questions? Yeah.
No. After expanding, it still won't be the largest in Australia. Do you think the expansion of the NGV with NGV Contemporary will? Probably not, because they still won't be the biggest galleries in the world. I think ideally, it'd be more about looking at focusing an Australian market and an Australian populace on Australian artists. That's the dream.
Any other size queens on the board?
No, I absolutely agree. I don't think you'll do nothing, because I think in order for people to come to you, you've got to be showing something really fresh, new, and something they haven't seen. I think when Mona arrived in Hobart, you put Hobart weirdly on the world map. But I think, has anyone of you been to Bentonville, Arkansas, apart from you, to look at the art?
To where?
Bentonville.
No, I haven't.
Crystal Bridges.
Ah.
Right? It's the biggest collection of, American art. And is that right? It's the biggest one now, isn't it?
I don't know.
It'd be pretty much up there. And I just think, you know, we live in a global world. And if you're a global art observer, what would bring you to Sydney or Melbourne? It has to be something quite audacious.
It's got to be the collection.
Yeah, it has to be the collection.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what I think. And if they can build a building without the collection, then no one will come.
It's
if they can
something-
build the collection, then someone will
Yeah.
come.
If you build it, they will come. But it is one of those things, for example, I mean, like in regards to supporting Australian artists, I know with Mona, you know, they would go to grad shows and purchase really interesting works by recent graduates. Giles Kitson was one of them. She was purchased and she had her work shown there, and she's going to be I think a really great artist. I would love to see something like a MoMA PS1 kind of model with our art galleries that support really interesting, really kind of like cutting edge emerging artists, and support artists that are willing to push boundaries here and not necessarily have their primary focus of showing kind of international artists or drawing people in, but more cultivating a internationally relevant or a kind of internationally successful base for artists to show really interesting works. At the end of the day, with Hobart, that isn't a major tourist destination. You know, like Hobart, like the whole purpose of Mona wasn't to, wasn't to all of a sudden like have an interesting collection so much as it was to create like a cultural worth. You know, it was to make something important, and hopefully, I guess, with a lot of our museum expansions, they'll try to foster something more than just kind of plonk a pin on a map and say, come visit us here. You know, they'll try to create a cultural longevity, like you said before.
What you don't want is a giant gallery with nothing worth looking at inside it.
Hopefully they're starting to collect now.
I don't mean that regarding with your idea. I think it's a good idea, but you know, there are galleries around that are large, and you know,
Definitely.
they don't really have anything enough fantastic things in them to make. Like if I look at where I want to travel, I'll look at the collections in the museums.
I just hope it doesn't do it like a Cartier show, you know. Like I hate to
Yeah,
read the NG or something, but man, I mean, like do something good with your space, honestly.
Yeah, well,
That was one of the best things I saw this year.
She just likes shiny things.
On Earth.
And you bought the whole show, didn't you?
But that was
one
a
of the
renter show. That was a renter show.
Excuse me, have you seen the three previous iterations of it? I have.
Exactly,
The
it's
best
a
things-
third
it was
iteration.
It had the best. It had way more than anything else. And I can tell you that brought more people. Their catalogue went through 4 printings. You tell me one Australian show that went through 4 printings of a catalogue, sold out. It resonated with the public.
yeah.
And was there an
maybe-
Australian
and then-
artist in there, or was it a Cartier artist in there? You know,
No,
it's
oh,
like
no.
didn't
Well,
do
Cartier
anything
is
to
one
help.
of the most culturally relevant, resonating things, and jewellery. And you notice this is from Goshra
Oh,
Pictures. You know, it's
babe, I know.
But you know, it's a quotation from the Russian constructivists. And so I'm just trying to say that art is expanded in these many, many forms,
Yeah.
and that we
Which
have
is
to.
great.
And as you know, last year, why it was there was because there was the great Taboo jewellery exhibition in Paris, and that you're right. 1/10 of the works in the Cartier were in that show, but the other 9/10 weren't. And I can tell you that those 9/10 were things that no one ever seen. I don't know if you know, but most of those works never had left Britain, ever, unless on the head of the Queen. Or a Queen.
Any other questions? Oh,
Slamming.
That's all right.
excellent.
Oops.
Can't condone that.
Can't condone that, yeah.
The issue is, who is the artist? What is the work? How good is it? How interesting is it? Like, it's not an artist making a T-shirt. It's, what is that T-shirt? What's the idea in it? It's like, you know, I think artists can do anything. They really can. They can do, there's no rules. You know, that's why artists are so special, because they break the rules. They make us see what we think we know well, and we see it totally differently.
There are definitely some amazing artists at NASA, but in the printmaking faculty, there are currently students at NASA doing some amazing T-shirts. So definitely, like, if you see emerging artists doing T-shirts, please support them. And there are definitely ways to do a T-shirt real good. I think there are also ways to do a T-shirt real bad.
But to me, you raise a really important question, and that's about the teaching of art. And if you believe that the boundaries you were taught at the National Art Schools were real, then the teachers failed. Because art is always about the boundary. It's always about the edge. It's all about someone doing something new, something fresh, something different. If they told you by doing a T-shirt is crass and horrible, well, they underestimate where the world was going. Because I recently bought an Elm Green and Drag Set T-shirt, and they made it like a fun thing, right? And so that's the other thing I guess I have a little beef about, and that is that in Australia, I guess, the teaching of art probably has to improve, because I think the eye has to be better for you guys, especially artists and galleries, to get that higher price point, because it has to resonate not just with an Australian audience, it has to resonate with a global audience. And that global audience has to see equal value in it. And you can't see equal value in it if it's not, people aren't taught what is the current art. And sure, I think there are artists who resonate on an Australian level, but if you resonate on a global level, or like my friend Lindy, just a Chinese level, you'll be really successful.
But Dick, when I was at art school a long time ago, all the teachers mostly wanted to teach how they personally painted.
I totally agree with you.
And
what
that
are most
is a
of them?
problem.
They're failed artists.
Well, even the ones that aren't still haven't got. I found it really annoying because they wanted us to paint like Cézanne.
Yeah.
And of course, none of us were Cézanne or
We wanted to be.
I
clever.
remember a wonderful story that
And
one
it
of
was,
the artists I collect told
it's
me.
quite destructive though, because it turns a lot of people off.
Well, I think hopefully we're looking at our education system,
Generally.
which was basically invented to churn out insurance clerks in the Victorian era.
But the trouble
and
is,
changing that now, but art should be part of that.
but they always follow fashions. And now they'll be following whatever's fashionable in the international art market. So it perpetuates, rather than trying to bring out whatever each person has to offer. I mean, one person might be great at painting with a sable brush, another person might be brilliant at photography or whatever, but you don't, it's sad that it's fashions that are perpetuated, not the
Not
person.
fashion itself.
I
but
guess-
I was going to
No.
tell a funny story, and that was a few years back at the Melbourne Art Fair. I was collecting this young artist called Kate Rode, who's not represented here. She had a big installation at the Melbourne Art Fair, and I remembered her art teacher from wherever she went, RMIT, whatever, kept and said, "What are you doing here?" And she goes, "This is my booth. This is my thing." And she goes, "Why?" And she said, "Why are you here?" And she goes, "This is me." And the art teacher couldn't believe it, because the art teacher was this sort of failed artist, and here she was, the student whom she hated, failed all the time, thought she was worthless and useless. Yeah. And then she said, "Well, I am this art show," and the teacher just could not believe it,
Well,
because
there's a lot of envy.
I agree.
The green-eyed monster is alive and well in any field,
Yes,
whatever it
that's
is.
true.
But I mean, like, if there's one theme from the 1850s till today, it's like, just don't listen to your teacher and do it. You know, like, honestly, I think it's real easy to create an education system or to say, my teacher said that it's not a good idea, but just do it. You know, like, if you have a conviction, then that's what's important.
Don't listen to your art teacher, listen to your dealer.
Yeah.
I think that's probably it for now. We have to go and buy some more Australian art. I think the answer to the question is probably, why is Australian art so cheap? Because Australians are cheap, by the sounds of it. So you get out there and support your creatives as much as you can, and don't quibble about the price.
Make small contribution in favour of
Yeah.
But one of these special spells was always asking artists to contribute artworks in some way, theme for them. And then they would be used to raise money for people in their drums. It was high success behind it. One year he asked 6 artists, like the other 5 were men, Holland Lansley, Solitaires or Fred, John Carriageworks, Jones, myself. We were asked to create a t-shirt design in the audience, and in all of us, the image on the t-shirt very much related to our body of work. And Joe also managed to convince all the David Jones stores around Australia to sell this product, and the artists were asked to come in. I had to spend a week sitting in Sydney, I agreed to sit in David Jones' store for a week, and it was advertised that the artists would be there and would be prepared to sign the t-shirt. I thought, God, I thought I'd be there by myself all day long. They're very bored. In fact, and it was the same for the others, I was inundated with people lining up. In fact, there were 2 lovely Japanese women who were here as tourists, and they had decided that all of their friends back in Japan were going to get, as it happened, my t-shirt to give as a gift, because they wanted everybody to get the same gift, so nobody was saying yours is better than mine, sort of thing. And I had to sign it all.
Fantastic.
And it was an absolutely amazing exercise for me. And since that was years ago, I still get people contacting me who relate that image to one of their relatives.
Fantastic.
To ask if I've got any still got any t-shirts.
I think there's a movie about you now, isn't there? Called Ladies in Black or something that's just come out?
Oh, yeah. That's right.
Okay, I'd like you all to give a round of applause to our very generous guests.